Okay, here we have some data on the sum of two dice that have been rolled in 50 trials. And we're going to use this data to come up with both a frequency table and frequency diagram, as well as a cumulative frequency diagram. So using the raw data, what we want to do first is convert that raw data into a frequency table. So I've got a table set up here where we've got the sum in the first column. So the sum of the two dice could be 2 up to 12. And we're going to count how many times each of those sums happened in our raw data. So out of these 50 trials. So it's just 50 trials. What we could do is just go through and manually count how many times each sum occurred. So for example, a sum of 2 happened once here, twice, 3 times, and 4 times. A sum of 2 happened. So we're going to put a 4 into the frequency table there. And we're going to do a similar count for all of the other possible sums. So we get the following frequency table. So what we can do now is use these two columns to graph a frequency diagram. So what we want here is a line graph. Okay. Now this isn't quite the data that we wanted to graph, so what we're going to do is do select data, and we're just going to remove what's here right now and add in the series that we actually want to graph. So the series values are going to be the frequency and the horizontal axis labels, so our labels along the bottom, that's going to be the possible sum of the two dice. And hit OK. And again, we can customize our graph so that it works for what we want it to do. So we can get rid of that part. But we might want to add some labels on this graph. So up at the top here where it says Chart Tools, you can click on Layout, and that will bring up some options for you to enter in chart title, axis titles, a legend if you want, and all kinds of other options. So let's go with the axis titles. Primary horizontal axis, we're going to put a title below. So that will be sum of two dice. And then we also want a vertical axis title. We can do a rotated option there. And for that one, we can enter frequency. Okay, so now our graph is showing how many times, so the frequency, that each of those sums occurs. So we could stick a title in here as well, saying that this is the frequency of dice sums. And there's our frequency diagram. Okay? Now, in a very similar way, we could generate a histogram for this data. Now this is discrete data. We can't have any sums in between each of these values. So we would want a bar graph that would represent discrete data. So we're going to insert a column graph this time. Okay. And here we, again, want to select data. Our series values are the frequency. So basically the data part here is set up exactly the same way we just did the frequency diagram. It's just now we're working with a column or a bar graph instead of a line graph for that we just used for the frequency diagram. And again, the horizontal axis labels are the sums. Okay. And similarly, we could add in a label on each of the axes and a title using the same layout options at the top here. Okay. So you'll see the overall shape is the same. It's just the frequency diagram is a line graph, whereas we could also use a bar graph to display this data. Now on that frequency diagram, you might also want to make each of those points a little bit more prominent. So you can right click on the actual line on the line graph and go to Format Data Series. And marker options will allow you to choose different types of markers for each of those points. I'm just going to click Automatic and it will pick one. Okay, so now on our graph we can actually see those points a little bit more clearly. If we want a cumulative frequency, the cumulative frequency is the frequency kind of on an ongoing basis. So we're going to add up all of the frequencies up until that sum. Okay, so for the first cumulative frequency, that would just be how many times does the sum of 2 occur? So that would be the same as this frequency that's here. For the second cumulative frequency, that would be how many times does a sum of 3 or less occur? So 3 or 2. So that would be the sum of the first 2 frequencies. For the third one, that would be the frequency that a sum of 4 or less occurs. So 4 or 3 or 2. So that one would be the sum of the first 3 frequencies from that table. Okay, and we're going to repeat the process. And we notice when we get to the bottom of the cumulative frequency table that we get a total of 50, which is good because we know we had in our raw data 50 trials or 50 rolls of those dice. So for a cumulative frequency diagram, we're going to add in another line graph. And again, this isn't quite what we wanted, so let's select data and get rid of what's there. And our series values this time are going to be the cumulative frequencies instead of just the regular frequencies. And again, our horizontal axis is going to be the sum of the 2 dice. Okay. So we get this kind of graph, which looks quite different from the regular frequency graph. So again, this is the ongoing or the cumulative frequency. So at any point, let's say if I'm looking at a sum of 8, I can see the value there is 37, which means that out of 50 times that the dice were rolled, 37 times I got a sum of 8 or less. That's what the cumulative frequency is representing. And again, we can right-click on that graph, format, and select markers so that we can see some of those points a little bit more clearly. But if we just hover over one of the points, it will give us the actual cumulative frequency. Once again, if we click at the top here under Layout for Chart Tools, we can add a chart title. And so there's an example of a bar graph, frequency diagram, and a cumulative frequency diagram for this particular set of data.